I was 5 when I left Delhi, right? And so I remember it being, I remember it being very warm, and I remember it being a very innocent time, and a kind of, um, I was a bit naughty as a kid, just, but not in a, not in any great infamy, but I was just kind of, my mum told me a story of how there was a person begging on the streets, and I took my shirt off and gave him my shirt from my school uniform, you know, and I came home without a shirt, and she was like, she went crazy, asking about that, and I was like, well, he had nothing, so I gave him my shirt, and she was like, why, and I remember my dad being real disciplinarian, who for the first time ever wasn't annoyed. He was just sort of laughing and going, can't believe you did that. And so things like that. I remember cows roaming, in like you do in many parts of India. And I remember going out for walks with the family. There's this beautiful period, dusk. We call it Sham.
Mm.
And Sham is this lovely period, just before night kind of sets in and the sun is setting, and it's dusky, and I remember all the noises and the smells, this kind of very visceral sort of sense. And I remember a great community of people. We kind of knew everyone, my family knew everyone. So when we walked down the street, my dad would say hi to this guy that fixed cars and that guy who was selling this particular type of food, and so there's a real sense of community. And we lived in a fairly big house. I remember it being quite large, and very, very square. It wasn't Victorian or Edwardian or anything, but it was just quite square. And I remember there being a big yard, and we had a rooftop. And I remember going out to the rooftop and seeing, I could see, you'd see birds of prey, which is quite usual. But for me, being a kid, I loved that, and I was fascinated with them, and so I just remember it being a really, quite enchanting time, quite a lovely time, um, which changed a few years later. Yeah.
Mm. And so what triggered the move to the UK?
The move was triggered really by the great British press, in India, sort of talking about how there's a shortage of doctors and nurses and medical staff, and we need more of that, and we value it, and we pay very well for it and look after families over there. And my father had a doctorate, and so the pay he was offered, and the story he was sold was, the dream he was sold was too good to pass up on. And like, I think, like every individual, that universal truth of wanting to do better for your family, he saw it as a way of doing better.
Mm.
So that was the reason we left. It was on this promise of a better life, essentially,
Yeah.
here in the UK, which didn't turn out to be the case, really.
Yeah. So what did that look like? Because that must have, I mean, you mentioned there that lovely community and that there's we need that as human beings.
Yeah,
So
we do.
to
Yeah,
go from that, just from listening to previous stories that you've told,
yeah.
is it safe to say that that was something completely different when you arrived here?
Yeah, man. And I couldn't process it, because as a kid of 5, it's like today there are all sorts of ways of speaking to children, and and understanding and learning, and I think that's great. But back then, I couldn't understand, so we weren't given a choice, So my dad was like, right, we're moving. It's not like today where I would sit down with my children and I'd say, look, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Ask, gather their opinion. It was, we're moving, right? So okay, cool, so we're moving. And then it was so first of all, it was the sense of it being very cold, right? I didn't own a coat, I didn't own a coat, man. I didn't know what a coat was, and so, first of all, it was the climate was very, very different. Then I'm seeing all these strange people, and we don't fit in at all. I don't see anyone who looks like me. It's very, and so there's this sense of just being a complete stranger. Then there's the language, right? I don't speak English. No, I'm speaking 4 dialects, Indian dialects, but I don't speak English, so I can't I can't communicate, at all. I can't read the language, I can't write the language, I can't speak it. And then it just kind of got worse from there. We went from a large house with a bit of a roof terrace, in quite an industrial part of Punjab. Don't get me wrong, we're not talking about, this is not Beverly Hills, man, but from and then we lived in a room. We're living in four of us are living in a room. My sister was just born. She was 6 months old, if that. So we went from living in a 5 bedroom house with gardens and community and warmth to living in a room. Four of us in one room, a cot, a bed for my mum and dad, and then a small bed for me. And so, and again, I didn't question it. I wasn't really allowed to question it, and I just had to kind of deal with it, and my grandparents lived next door in the next house. They lived in a room in the next house.
Yeah.
And that brought me a great amount of solace. I loved that. I loved my granddad. I loved going to see him and just chat with him, and we'd open a can of Coke together. That was his thing with me, and just talk. And I loved that. I loved him dearly, and so yeah, it was a very strange feeling of feeling so inclusive and warm and kind of, together and happy. I would just, to being quite unhappy and quite unsure and uncertain, about what's going on, and like I say, not being able to communicate, was really,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah, so and I love this. I've heard you describe yourself as cocky, and I like the naughty kids aspect.
Yeah.
What happened to that guy in this environment? Because that must have been, without the outlet, without the verbal skills, and without the familiarity. What I mean, did you go inside yourself? Did you? And what? I mean, how did you adapt?
So like I said, I'd always been a bit cheeky. I'd always been a bit of a joker, but there was no malice. There was never any malice, in who I was and what I did, and stuff. But as I got older and I became more self-aware, I started to understand what racism was, and it started with people kind of just talking about me and, calling me names and stuff like that. And I kind of just dealt with it, became somewhat introverted in a way, but I wouldn't let them do that. I'm too proud for that, and so, and then it started getting a bit physical, every now and then, I'd sort of walk through, a corridor at a school and I'd get barged, and I knew what it was. I knew it was malicious, but I didn't really pick up on it. I didn't do anything about it, And then one day I was just walking home from school, and there was a couple of kids who were I think 2 or 3 years older than me, and they were sitting on a wall quite near where I live now, actually, quite near where I live now. And it was a sort of shortcut through a graveyard near where I live. And I was walking home, and they saw me, and I knew it was coming. You just kind of know, and it's that thing where you go, I can't back out of this. There's only one way in, there's one way out, unless I turn around and run. And I don't do that. I've never done that, it's something I never do even today, and so I just carried on walking and hoping it wasn't. And they went to sort of kick me, and I just sort of pushed them away because they were quite high up on this wall. And then one of them spat on me, and it's the first time that ever happened. And I felt that, and I just became incensed, it just, this rage just took over me. And I remember pulling them down, one of them down from the wall, and then just kind of a flurry of sort of kicks and punches, and and there wasn't a lot really. They talk about kind of seeing red, or and it was like that. It was like that, and it felt like 10 minutes. It was probably about 20 seconds, but it was the first time I'd fought back, and what I know today is adrenaline, it was coursing through me, and the other kid ran off. The one I was sort of hitting and, and on top of, got up, and he sort of went another way. And I just And I ran home. I kind of ran home thinking they're going to come for me again,
Yeah.
and they know where I live and all this. It's just these weird things sort of rushing through your head. Got home and I remember my heart just beating out of my, just
Yeah.
beating it, out of my ribs, right? And I just thought, and that was the first time it happened. And then that realization that actually, I don't have to put up with this, and from being quite sort of scared and sort of, you know, vulnerable to being, I'm not going to have this anymore kind of thing. That was a real realization because I couldn't tell anyone, I didn't feel like I could tell anyone, and so I just had to live with it.
Yeah.
And even my friends, most of my friends were white. They didn't understand. They didn't, the area I was in was predominantly a white area, right? So they're not going to understand, at that age. And I was still forging relationships with them anyway, still quite new in, so, and that was it. It was a real turning point.